So hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Anne Herrera. I'm the Chief FinTech Correspondent at Reuters. I'm here with, or not really here, but kind of here with Dan Schulman, the President and CEO of PayPal, and we have a very important topic to discuss and one that is very, I guess, important these days. So really, I guess the role of companies being responsible in this current environment and just in general going forward. So I'll start with a very intense question. So what impact do you think sort of COVID and the pandemic has had on the existing widening economic and social inequality in the US and maybe even globally, but let's concentrate on the US first.
Sure. Well, first of all, Anna, a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you for having me. And I agree with you. I think this is a very important topic. Not sure there could be a more important topic than what companies can do to step up and address some of the shortcomings that we see in capitalism and also in our economies. And to your question, there was a crisis well before the pandemic started, but it was sort of camouflaged by robust economic numbers and robust employment numbers. But even before the pandemic, something like 2/3 of all Americans struggled to make ends meet at the end of the month. They were financially stressed. They were financially unhealthy. And when you ask them about the system, 25% of them believe that capitalism is working in its current form. This is the first generation in the US ever that does not believe that their lives will be better than their parents. And that is really the American dream. It's sort of the foundation of capitalism. And in many ways, I think it's the foundation of democracy, because democracy means that you have to stand up and really think about more than just yourself. You need to think about the whole, not the individual. But how can we expect people to think about the whole when they're struggling so mightily every single month to just make ends meet? They think that the system is not working for them. And the pandemic just accelerated all of those trends. You're seeing maybe 100 million people in the world move into extreme poverty over the course of the last 6 months. And in the US, I think it's something like 14 million people have moved into poverty. So this is a real pressing issue. It was a real issue before the pandemic, and the pandemic has just accelerated that trend.
So given this situation is so critical, what should companies in general, just the corporate and private sector, do to help address these issues and how they're progressing right now?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing is for all of us as leaders of companies in the private sector, I think we need to recognize, and I think many of us do already, but I think all of us need to recognize that we cannot just sit aside and think that the problems that are facing our society, our economies, our communities that we live in will be solved by governments or by nonprofits. We need to stand up and partner with governments. We need to partner with academia, with nonprofits, and we need to take responsibility, I would say moral responsibility, for thinking about multi-stakeholders. This has been now the new phrase around capitalism, multi-stakeholder capitalism. But this is really, just a catchword for being responsible as a corporate leader, for thinking about not just maximizing profitability next quarter, which people tend to think of as the driving credo of Milton Friedman, but really to think about your employees, the communities we live in, our customers, and our environment, and not just our shareholders. But I will say this, I think if you are a true leader in multi-stakeholder capitalism, I think that you will find that there isn't a disconnect between being a company with values and being a company that has a purpose that goes beyond maximizing shareholder value is at odds with becoming a great company over the long term and generating maximum returns for shareholders. I actually think the two go hand in hand. But I do think that people are coming to this realization, and we as companies can do so much internally for our employees, for our customers, for the communities that we live in. And I think it is incumbent upon us to do so. I think you're on mute, Anna.
Obviously. So before I move on and ask you sort of what PayPal is doing specifically, there's, especially since June when there were protests in the US, we heard companies speak up a lot more. But recently, and a couple of weeks ago, one company, another fintech company, which is smaller than PayPal but still growing, Coinbase, put out a sort of blog saying they were going to become apolitical and that they weren't going to make any statements or take any action that was around social justice or anything that wasn't related to their mission, which is, I guess, spreading cryptocurrencies and growing cryptocurrency infrastructure. So what's your take on that stance? Can you truly be apolitical? Is it something you've been hearing more about in Silicon Valley, or I'm just curious to hear, because it's very, very different from what you've been saying so far.
Yeah, it is different. That's okay. People have differences of opinion all the time. And I think what makes our country strong is if we can listen to each other and have conversations and not be dogmatic about one thing or the other. But here's my view. My view is if you're a major consumer brand in the United States and around the world, as PayPal is, with over 350 million people on our platform, there's no way to fully stay out of the cultural wars or politics. But the way that you should think about it, I think, as a business leader, is not to think about how am I going to take a political stand one way or another, but really to think about how am I going to be true to the values of my company. Because every company should have a mission. Ours is to democratize financial services, to drive financial health for all citizens, to be sure nobody is left behind as we move into the digital economy. That's a very inclusive mission. And therefore, the number one value inside PayPal is inclusion and diversity. And we need to stand up for that when we see issues that go against that. When North Carolina passed the bathroom bill and we were about to do a major operations center in North Carolina, we pulled out of North Carolina because we felt that that bill discriminated against people for their sexual orientation or sexual identity. We've taken stands against the Immigration Act. We have stood up for Black Lives Matter and did a $530 million commitment, both in the short term and the long term, to really be in the fight for racial equality, to erase or to help reduce the racial wealth gap. And so these are not, and I would argue, political activities. These are values-based activities. And people sometimes conflate values and politics. But I try very hard not to say that this is a red issue or a blue issue, but really are these red, white, and blue issues? Are these American values or PayPal values? And if they are, then we need to stand up for them, because values cannot be something that are up on a wall that you don't act on. Because if that's the case, you probably ought not to have those values, then they're just propaganda. And so we'll take stands based on our values. And because of that, our employees know where we stand. And those employees who embrace those values will come to PayPal and work here. And I think the single biggest competitive advantage that PayPal has is the strength and the talent of its employees. And having values and acting on those, I think, are one of the ways that we attract and maintain the best talent.
So you mentioned some of the things that PayPal has done this year and even, previous years, but what have you been doing from a business perspective? You have a lending part of the business, and, it's a tough time for many people. So have you been taking any action there to make sure that, you're helping customers who might not be able to make ends meet this next few months? Or, what other things as a business could you be doing to help that aren't, creating a fund, which again, is part of it, but is not directly related to your financial activities?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I think one of the things that early on, when we first spun off from eBay 5 years ago, we had the opportunity to think about, do we set up, our ESG, over as a separate group, kind of as a foundation maybe, or do we integrate all of our mission and our values into our products and our services, so that, our whole company is a company that is progressive, that thinks about all of its shareholders in the way that we do business. And a great example of that is our working capital program. Not that many people know we're probably one of the top 5 lenders of working capital to small businesses in the US. And what's really interesting to me is that 70% of the working capital loans that we give to businesses occur in the 10% of counties where 10 or more banks have closed their branches. And where do banks close their branches? They close their branches where the median income is below the national average. And so these are neighborhoods that are poor, that often are more multiracial than other neighborhoods. And so we lend disproportionately into those neighborhoods. And here's the really great statistic. When we lend to a business in those neighborhoods, their average sales go up by 22% versus the control group that goes up by 1%. So this is really a matter of these businesses just needing access to capital. And when they get it, they can grow their sales. And when they grow their sales, they can hire more people. They have more financial health for those sole proprietors. And so this is just a perfect example of using our data and our algorithms to lend into areas where traditional banks do not today, and making a real difference with our products.
So some online lenders, and I realize we're getting a bit into the weeds of online lending, but it is kind of my area. But some online lenders have said that they're kind of tightening their credit requirements, as are the banks doing now in the current environment. What is PayPal doing, and are you expecting that even in those areas where online lenders were able to make a dent, like in the past few years, people will start suffering even more because the online lenders themselves will be retreating? And how do we avoid that and make sure that that lifeline is still there?
Well, I think every lender needs to be sure that they're lending responsibly. And we are, in fact, just putting in another round of algorithms and updates to it that we think will be able to expand our ability to loan by about 40% more from where we just were with these changes. And so I do think that it is important that we adjust to the times, that there are so many businesses still in the US that are thriving in this pandemic that need access to capital. And you really need to adjust quickly your algorithms and your data sets to be able to identify those businesses and responsibly lend to them. The other thing that we did do, Anna, is we also, as part of our $530 million commitment, is we gave out $10 million of grants, not even loans, just grants to Black-owned businesses that were hit hard by COVID-19. As you know, Black-owned businesses were hit twice as hard than white-owned businesses. You had more of them going out of business. There was no way that they could get loans from traditional banks. And so we gave out over 1,000 grants to Black-owned businesses to help them, over at least the next couple of months to really keep their business afloat and moving. And so I think there's a combination of your products and services adapting, making sure that you're giving loan forgiveness programs where people can pay back in extended timeframes, lending responsibly by using different data, but also giving into the communities that we live among and helping that way. So I think there are lots of different ways that companies can step up and should step up, and we're trying to do that in a responsible way as well.
So I guess part of being responsible is also being responsible towards your employees. So what does sort of PayPal do to make sure that, you mentioned diversity and inclusiveness, but I guess, being a financial company, you also want to make sure that your employees are doing well financially and are, okay on that end.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And when I think about this multi-stakeholder capitalism, the responsibility that I have to multiple constituents, the number one most important constituent to me is my employees. As I mentioned before, it's my biggest single competitive advantage. And I think there are two things that attract employees to a company. One is, your mission and your values, and those are crucial. But the second is that your employees can feel financially healthy and secure. And remember, I told you the stat at the beginning of our conversation that 2/3 of the country struggles to make ends meet at the end of the month. And I did a survey inside of PayPal in all of our call centers, all of our entry-level positions, to find out, were people doing okay, from a financial health perspective, because we pay at or above the market in every single location where we employ people. So I thought the results of that survey were going to be very positive, and I was going to talk about them in a very proud way at an all-employee meeting. But what came back was very disturbing, in that our employees were struggling just like the rest of the country. And it really told me two things. One, that capitalism is not working for this segment of the population, because we're paying at or above the market and they are struggling to make ends meet. Number two, if we are going to be a company that really is thinking about how do we democratize financial services and drive financial health, we need to start inside the company. And so we took real action. First of all, we came up with a measurement, which was this net disposable income. How much money does somebody have left over after they pay taxes and all of their essential living expenses? And what we found when we measured is that for many of our employees, their NDI was 4 to 6%. So no wonder they were struggling. They did not have much money left over after paying taxes and essential expenses. And we decided that for people to feel financially healthy, their NDI had to be at least 20%. So that's a massive increase from where they were. We're at 16% today now across our company. What we did is we lowered healthcare benefits by 60%. We increased salaries where we needed to, and we also gave every single employee stock. So everyone is a shareholder in PayPal so they can share in our success. And we wrapped all of that into a financial education program so people could learn, what do you do with stock? How do you save? Where do you invest? And so by the end of next year, we will be at our 20% target. And to me, that was a very defining moment for PayPal. It obviously costs us money to go and do that. But what we're seeing is employees multiple times engaged in doing the right thing for customers. Our attrition dropping by over, 2/3. And so, these are things that I think come back and assure that we serve customers better than anybody else. We have the most passionate employees. And if we do all of that, shareholders are served extraordinarily well because we're serving our customers better than we ever did before. You're on mute again, Anna.
Oh God, the year has been too long, clearly. So it's time for it to end. So I mean, do you think there'd be some, I don't know, if investors or analysts or anyone or critics, anyone who would argue, well, being a responsible company is great, but it's all these things you're talking about are just a distraction. Dan, you should be focused on making us money. That's it. I don't care if your employees in a call center somewhere are not. That's their problem. Like, how is it something people still raise with you or not? And like, what is your response to them or to critics in general?
Yeah. I don't hear that all that frequently. Every once in a while, somebody will bring it up. But I think people are beginning to understand that not only is there not a disconnect between purpose and profit, they actually are linked together. And, typically what shareholders want to see are metrics and returns on those metrics. And by the way, so do I. I mean, I'm a very operational type of CEO, as anyone on my team will tell you. I like numbers and I like to understand them. But clearly, this is kind of a return on investment. We're investing in our employees. And what's happening is that they are much more engaged. They are 94% of all employees inside PayPal are very proud to work at PayPal. They understand our mission and our vision. Even those employees who were not those that, got the 60% reduction in healthcare costs, et cetera, because they were earning a lot more money. We're so proud that day that we announced that, because that's the type of company that we are. And so, I've seen our productivity go up, and all of that accrues to serving customers better. And again, this is a matter of timing, right? Maybe next quarter, our profits weren't maximized, but I truly believe that over, the medium term, you are going to maximize your return to shareholders because your employees are fully engaged and maximize. Your customers are happy with what you're doing. Consumers want to buy from responsible companies with responsible brands that they trust. Here's the thing, Anna, we are all in this together. This idea that, we don't all live in the same communities, that, the communities that we're supporting directly through our employees or through customers that we're helping are buying our products and services. This is all one thing together. And I think we are going to be much better off as communities, as companies, as a country, and in our global economy, if we all step up to address these issues in a responsible way. You can sub-optimize and get away with it for a short amount of time, but you can't get away with it over the medium and long term. And this is where I do think companies have a moral responsibility to stand up and to make a difference. And by the way, this is like the rule, what is that? The golden rule of life or something. You give and you get. And this is a place where we need to give, and eventually that's returned back to you. And if it isn't, you're doing the right thing anyway.
So it's been a stressful year, not for many, not just financially, but also, I guess, mentally. And that really is across the board. Obviously, if you have financial problems, it's even worse. But how have you been helping employees cope with that as a company to make sure everybody is doing okay, they're not isolated, and how are you supporting them? And what do you hope, since this is the last question, what do you hope can be carried forward even when the pandemic ends, so that you maintain good practices?
Yeah, well, that's another good question. There's no question it's been a stressful year. I mean, you've got health issues, you've got people very concerned about that. I mean, the virus, shows no sign of slowing down. You've got economic issues around the world. You've got a ton of psychological issues, just like you talked about, more depression, more people with mental stress than ever before. It's spilled over into social issues, everyone really rallying around, issues that have been ignored in the past, but can no longer be ignored, like inherent racism. And then you've got, obviously, it's all spilling over into the political realm as well. So you have at least 5 different things happening at one time. And that's put a lot of mental stress on our employees. And the way that we're trying to do that is, one, to recognize that, and to talk about it. So for instance, one thing we did that you maybe wouldn't be, intuitive right away is we've opted that to not rate anybody this year. So typically we rate people on a performance curve, from, doing excellent to, needs improvement. This year, we're not doing that because it's a very stressful year. And some people are juggling family life and kids at home, others are not. And so we thought it was just fair to basically say, look, we're going to, of course, give coaching and feedback and that kind of thing, but no ratings across the board. We also have provided a lot more counseling services for those who need it, mental health services. We've given more vacation days. We just gave, I think, 3 incremental vacation days in the back half of the year. And so we are trying all sorts of things, from yoga classes online to karaoke sessions, and just trying to check in all of the time with our employees, making sure that they've got, if they've got any health issues, we take care of them fully. They have crisis leave programs, or if you have an issue, you can leave, and we'll support you with that. So we've put into place tens, if not hundreds, of programs as a result of this. And my hope is that this idea of caring for your employees, taking care of them, which has been something we've believed for a long time, as you and I, I've talked about in this half hour. But the best practices around that will just continue post-pandemic as well. We all want to get back to work. All of us crave, some form of human connection as opposed to just, this remote. But it will no doubt change the way we work going forward as well. So we'll try and take the best of what was and the best of what is today, and it'll be something different for sure going forward.
Okay, thank you so much for your time, Dan.
Yeah, my pleasure, Anna. Thank you.